All right. We're recording now. Let me check the participants here. I'm going to share my monitor. Share my screen. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to probably continue monitoring the participants here on the side just in case someone decides to come in. So I might stop and pause for a second just to do that. But I do want to mention, to Cooper and Brian and Peter, thank you for, giving me an opportunity to do this. The last time we did it, I think was 2017, maybe 16. It's been a long time. So I'm pretty excited about doing it again. And we have quite a lot of updates since then and new projects. So what we're looking at here, just, go ahead.
We just got a chat that's saying there's no audio.
No audio. They can hear me, right?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Okay.
So
Yep,
maybe
you got audio.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah. I'm unmuted, so it should be good. Cool. Excellent. So I see the chat here. I want to keep my chat open. Anybody has any questions, anytime, let me know. I think there's a raise hand feature here. There's no video or there's no audio to this video. Just an FYI. So I back in 2016 had a conversation with Ryan Cooper, who's on this call, to talk about a possible project on the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. And the concept was similar to mapping a current mapping project that we had at the time, mapping out the Captain John Smith National Historic Trail with the Chesapeake Conservancy. The project was to map out all the rivers and the waterways of the Chesapeake Bay, and Cooper had the idea of, hey, why don't we do this for the Lewis and Clark Trail? And so fast forward about 5 years it took to make that happen. We figured out a way to make this happen back in 2021. And so I'm going to share some of the projects, the past 2 years of the project, and of course in the future, and a few other things we're doing. And at the same time, we still have people coming in, so I might be a little distracted from this. All right, here we go. Okay, so Terrain 360, introduction and history. We'll probably take a few minutes to talk about what it is, because people may never heard of what we do. I started it in 2012 in Richmond, Virginia, looking at Google Street View, thinking to myself, this doesn't exist for hiking trails and biking trails. And that was 2012, and it didn't exist for hiking trails, biking trails, and waterways. Google does have a few trails now that they've mapped with the backpack unit and some other areas. But back then it didn't exist. And I thought, well, this would be super cool to do in the outdoors. And, I grew up in Minnesota on the Mississippi River. So, being in the outdoors is, my thing. And then, of course, I love technology. I thought, well, this is a great way to kind of merge the two together. We started with only land-based trails. And as you can see on here on the right side, this is the Appalachian Trail. We mapped out single track mountain bike trails. We did some rail to trail, multi-use trails and hiking trails. They're easy to capture because you just need a single camera and a tripod, and you just walk. We ended up actually paying a guy to walk 500 miles the Appalachian Trail. And, I thought to myself, that's the coolest job you could think of to map out the Appalachian Trail and explore that and get paid to do it. Continuing on, we in 2014 introduced water trails as part of our part of what we do. And the first trail we mapped was part of the Captain John Smith National Historic Trail, but it was the James River in conjunction with the James River Association. They financed the project, did the press for it, helped with some shuttling. We mounted 6 cameras on top of a custom boat, which the concept still exists today, and I'll get to that in a minute. But as you can see here, this is downtown Richmond. We're on the water. We're going underneath a really cool pedestrian bridge, which is now a pedestrian bridge. That's completely brand new. But this was very unique at the time. We got a lot of press, especially internationally, being able to do fully immersive 360-degree imagery on the water, which is pretty neat. And this is leading into the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, I think. Continuing on. This is more of the James River. We mapped out 360 miles, took the entire summer of 2014, which was wild how much time we spent mapping out just 300 something miles of the trail. Lots of issues, you know, how do we store all this data? Cameras and syncing with GPS, you know, how do we trigger the cameras at the right time? We had weather and moisture issues, which, you know, if you're spending any time in the outdoors is always a problem, especially in the East Coast with a lot of rain and humidity. Of course, how to keep everything powered for long periods of time. This went beyond just having a single camera on a tripod powered with, you know, Canon camera batteries. This became a larger challenge to solve, which included how do we power 6 cameras for 12 hours a day, you know, for a week at a time. How do we sync the camera timing together? Because we had 6 cameras in a circle, basically triggering at the same time, which I'll show here. So the concept is based in Google Street View. We developed a custom 360-degree image viewer, as you can see here on the right side. Very simple and clean user experience. Ultra high resolution imagery, which is, I think, the key to making this successful. I want to capture the highest resolution imagery possible anywhere. I mean, I think it's just the photography itself, I think, is super important and making that just beautiful. And we developed a custom image processing stack, basically using Amazon Web Services as a primary provider to process the imagery. We store everything in the cloud on AWS, and we store locally. We have a server station right behind me, actually, next to those pictures. And now I designed this to integrate into websites like a YouTube video would, into ArcGIS, into iOS and Android apps using an API that we've developed. I do want to mention one quick side, since Martin Luther King holiday was yesterday. That's actually the peak visits of the year for Terrain 360. This tour is featured on Google Classroom, and I didn't submit it, someone did, but this is the #1 visited day of the year. Actually, it's Friday leading up to MLK Day, but this virtual tour in DC, which we captured a couple years ago, got 22,000 visits per hour. So that was definitely challenging. It started in 2000, I think 2020, no, it might have been 2021, post-COVID, when we started getting crazy amounts of traffic to the website, and we had to figure out a way to make sure this scales and it can handle traffic, so kids can explore this particular monument, which I think is super cool. Moving on, a few more people to admit to the waiting room here. So the technology, here's an example of what we do, or how we do it on the water. We have, because, you know, you can't stop and take 6 pictures. You have to do them simultaneously as you're traveling down the waterway. So this is on the Ohio River this past year. We have 5 cameras in an array triggered by a computer system. So the only responsibility of the operator of the boat, which is my boat guy right there, is just to drive straight and make sure you follow the shoreline to capture that imagery. Everything's saved on a hardened hard drive on the computer that's sitting right there at his feet. And I tell everybody who does this for me, I said, look, you know, if something happens, the boat sinks, get that hard drive. It's a lot harder to recreate what we just mapped than it is to have to rebuild a boat. So I thought that was funny. We do also run some sensors on the project as we go. We take the current temperature reading, barometric pressure. I get out, you know, I get the elevation profile, water temperature, humidity, and all that stuff. We don't really display it on the website, but I like to have extra data, you know, in case we need it. The example there on the right is West Point, Kentucky to Hawesville, Ohio, I believe. You can see look underneath the bridge on the Ohio River, which is part of the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. How do we capture paved paths like bike trail, bike paths? This is an example of a fat tire trike. Fat tire it's a little much. It's a little harder to pedal a fat tire trike on a paved path than it is like on on a gravel path, but it looks cool. So that's we have that. Here's an example of what it looks like, the final product, which looks fantastic. You can't even tell you're on a bike. So we're traveling down the Anacostia Riverwalk. The picture on the left and the picture on the right were taken around the same time, same day. You kind of see what what the mapping vehicle looks like in the final product, which I think is fantastic. Of course, this is my guy Mike. He's got a experimental backpack unit, which I think works most of the time. It's a little heavy, but it's got the same 5 cameras at the top, and you just walk it down the Appalachian Trail. Here's an example of it on the right. Seamless, looks beautiful, looks like every other trail we do. You just don't know that he's got a backpack camera unit. So you can see there, it's look pretty good. Fully mobile for all terrain types. This past summer, so this is kind of tying in with the Lewis Clark National Historic Trail. We worked with Bureau of Land Management out of Missoula to map the Old Buffalo Trail, which follows the Blackfoot River. It's absolutely gorgeous area. It's right there by Ovando in Montana, between Bonner and Ovando, and they graciously let us use with them driving their 6-wheeler UTV actually, and we just basically follow this old rail trail that hasn't really been designated quite yet as an official rail trail. It used to, I think it was a forestry train track. Anyway, we mapped that out with this ATV. You can see we have our camera unit attached to the center column of the UTV. And here's an example of what it looks like. My iPhone camera is taking pictures on the right, and on the left side here, you can see what it looks like in the virtual experience. You can barely see the hood of the vehicle, but it's the imagery just is, I think, absolutely stunning. But it's a true old rail path, which is I think the coolest thing, and it goes, I don't know. I mean, I think it goes like 40 or 50 miles. So we did a small segment as a demo with them this past year. I think we did 9 miles, and we plan to go back hopefully this coming year to complete it. We got to the end of it, and I think I might have a picture somewhere where there was some kind of landslide and a huge boulder blocked the path. I will say, just as a side note, this is grizzly country, and I was super nervous doing this path. So that was some of the little side note. Another mapping component of this, sometimes we have to map out whitewater or some rivers that are, and of course this isn't really whitewater, it's just a nice little river, but it can get pretty rough. So we have a raft we can attach our gear to map out some of those difficult situations. At the end, I'll show you some images of we mapped out the Tuolumne River in California, and that was class 5. And so I wasn't on the boat, I had a guy do it. But it was wild how that thing was moving around, but the imagery turned out to be incredible. But as you can see, these are actually simultaneously at the same time. There's my van at the top right, on the right side there. If you look to the right, of course, I'm looking down at him in the boat. So these are actually I think it's pretty cool. 2 images at the same time looking at each other. So moving on to talk more in detail about the Lewis Clark National Historic Trail projects proposed in 2016. And we're finally doing something really awesome, I think, a few years later. So there's 4,900 plus miles of trails that we can map. A lot of that's waterway, which includes the Ohio River. And sections of the Ohio River are so wide, we actually have to do both sides. And we're working on that hopefully this summer or the next summer. Working on this summer, the Missouri River, of larger sections of the Missouri. We did a few last year, which I'll showcase here in a minute. And then, of course, the Columbia and the Snake Rivers, which are huge, literally and figuratively. And this right here is Rogers Pass in Montana, which is we actually had an intern, which I'll get into later, actually go out and intern with the National Park Service, and was able to go out with partnership with us and National Park Service to map out some of these trails and create this beautiful imagery here on the right side. 3 million, over 3 million high resolution, 360-degree images by the time we're done. And ultra high resolution, higher resolution actually than what you're seeing on the website. I think I want to say it's probably maybe 60 megapixel total when it's the original source imagery. And the way I look at it is we're digitally preserving these areas with ultra high resolution imagery, higher than what we actually can use in a virtual tour. So we're basically thinking ahead. What does technology look like in 20 years? And can we get that ultra fine, ultra sharp resolution to show people what these places look like at a point in time. And part of the whole process here is to integrate what we've done here, not just on the website, but integrate it into other partner and tourism websites and advocacy groups who are advocates of the trail and their websites. So people can explore these trails within the website or the web assets of the advocacy groups. But this Southern Missouri, this is the Gates of the Mountains on the right side. And then this, another part of what we're doing too is as we go, we geotag historical locations along the trail. And we could tag them within the actual imagery, which is really neat. Unfortunately, this slide is not the right one, but I probably could show you later where we tag, a campsite on the shoreline, for example, or this is where Meriwether Lewis stopped overnight, for example. There's a lot of that on the website, or this is where there's an important indigenous site here, historical site, and this. So we could tag those within the actual virtual tour. This is a really cool example. So this is the Blackfoot River in 2021. And if I click the time machine button, we fast forward 1 year in almost the exact same spot to see what it looked like a year later. And I'm demoing this because the implications say, well, we could do this 5 years apart or 10 years apart to show what a location looks like 2 different years apart. So 2021 was a lot of smoke. 2022 is beautiful blue skies. The dates are almost exactly the same. I believe it was within 3 or 4 days, same spot. Obviously he's a little over on to the river left in that case, but you get the point. I think this is super cool because you could do a comparison, especially when it comes to shoreline erosion or deforestation. You can kind of compare what it looked like in the past. And also, to me, if you're trying to convince a policymaker, the implications of a certain policy decision, you could show, hey, this is what it looked like 3 years ago or 4 years ago or last year versus now, to kind of really get an idea of the scale of change. This is done all the time with satellite imagery, but I thought, well, how cool would it be at the ground level, you're there in person to see the change. And just quick observations here, you can see the water is up 3 feet. So it was a little easier for my operator to go through this section of river than it was the year before. So I think that's a cool, really important feature. So part of the objective is to create a comprehensive digital record of the trail. This is kind of our back end and front end view here. We have these, thousands of images along these trails, and it's creating this amazing digital record for future generations. You can see this is our back end here, kind of showing all the scenes. You click into one and it goes into the actual full 360 view, which is the coolest thing. And then, of course, with any imagery, there's also, future science applications. We've integrated a little bit. We have some object detection features in the website where it basically just generalizes what objects or landscapes or whatever it sees. We send it to Amazon SageMaker. They send back the objects it detects, and it can also detect, lettering and signage and those kind of things. But this is getting better and better all the time, to the point where, we think it could detect individual species. Now, we can train a machine learning model to detect individual species, and we attempted that a couple of years ago with looking for Phragmites within the imagery. But it's difficult, I will say. But this, to me, I think is super cool for future technologies, kind of identifying things in the image. The other thing that's neat too, with the advent of DALL-E and Midjourney, which are AI tools, you can actually manipulate the imagery to kind of say, this is what it would look like if it was reforested, for example, or this is what it would look like if it became a desert in this area. And those are some of the things that I'm looking at in the horizon to be able to implement. You'd be able to see this 360 image and then it manipulate it to show you what things could look like, for example, within this virtual environment. This is the Snake River, which is cool because again, how many policymakers actually get out to the place that they're interested in advocating for? Some do, some don't, but this is, this is an example of the Snake. Well, this isn't, but earlier the Snake River, there's an important project there to get rid of some of the dams along the Snake River. And my thought was, well, we capture before and after, and I think that would be important to show. This is an example of before. This is, it's all flat water. Allegedly, they had class 5 rapids apparently before the dams were put up. So I think that'd be interesting to kind of see in a post. Digital access for those who are physically unable to see the trail, and education. This is Big Bone Lake State Park in Kentucky. As part of the Lewis Clark National Historic Trail. I think it's one of the neatest places in Kentucky. A lot of historical artifacts, a lot of prehistoric artifacts found there. Huge, I would not dinosaur bones, but like ice age animal, remains have been found there. There's some important historical things that have happened in that area too. So we got the inside of the I don't usually go inside, it's usually all outdoors, but I thought this was kind of cool to show as part of the trail. And then last but not least, with this objective, this is the Yellowstone Yellowstone River in Montana. This is about 3 weeks post flooding, if everyone remembers the flooding this past year. As you can see, there's a lot of erosion on the wall there on the river right. And part of it was, well, let's document what this river looks like now. I think we did 9 miles. I plan to do more in the coming future. I'd like to get, and Ryan Cooper, looking at you, I'd like to get the entirety of the Yellowstone River from the park, if possible, all the way to to the confluence with the Missouri, which would be awesome. But we did 9 miles. I think it's beautiful. It definitely showcases kind of what the effects of the flooding that happened. And again, if we come back in a year, you can kind of see before and after, which is neat. And the water was very high too. Still at this point when we went out there, it was moving very quickly. I was out on the boat. I had a professional raft guide do this section. But this all lives on the website. You can explore the Yellowstone River in its entire 9 mile entirety to be mapped. Let me go back here. Okay. While we were on the old Buffalo Trail, here's some cool imagery of the, there's the rock we couldn't get past on the right there, on the old Buffalo Trail, going back to what I was talking about. But we did pass a lot of really amazing indigenous sites, examples of where they used a segment of a tree bark for fire starter, which was, these are the archaeologists that I work with at BLM that kind of showed that, and wasn't allowed to take pictures because they wanted to preserve the location of these things and didn't want it to be affected. So we basically turned off the camera equipment and drove past it and kept going and turned it back on and kind of looped the two together so you couldn't tell exactly where it was located. But I thought that was awesome and really fascinating. Of course, here's him trying to get over the rock. It's a little embarrassing, but that's an example of the issues we come across in these trails. So we had to turn back around, go backwards for a while and then turn back around because it's on a cliff. So cool. So to date, we've mapped out on the Lewis Clark National Historic Trail 740 miles of the Ohio River. Blackfoot River in Montana, 40 miles. We did a section of it twice in 2 years. We did I think all of the Missouri breaks, I believe the entirety of the Missouri breaks in Montana, and all the way to the reservoir. And yeah, it's amazing landscape. It's like you're on the moon. 10 miles of Yellowstone ish, 9 to 10 ish. We did 30 miles in Nebraska, Missouri River, and of course 30 in the Snake River in Washington. And of course a myriad of hiking trails along the way as well. Moving on, 180 sites along the Ohio, actual land-based sites, 40 plus indigenous historically important sites in Montana and Idaho. Here's an example. This is Nez Perce, Heart of the Monster Monument, National Historical Monument in Idaho, which is really a really cool story, and it's featured on our website. Some of the really amazing things that can happen with a partnership like this that I have with the National Park Service is they have interns, and the interns can do cool projects like what we're doing. So we have a woman named Morgan Scafini on the right there. She was able to, as an intern with the National Park Service, go map for Terrain 360 and the parks and map out some of these cool hiking trails along the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. She drove, from I think Missoula, to all the way into the backcountry and mapped out some segments of trails that we weren't able to get. And it's super exciting trip for her. She now works for Maxar. So, hey, you work for Terrain 360 for a few months, so you got to work for one of the big digital globe, mapping companies. So to tell your interns that. But anyway, there's opportunities there. We're open to programs like that. We're, giving interns the opportunity to do something they wouldn't normally do. And whether that's, something web-based, right now we got somebody who's working on some mapping tools and some other projects. But this was a culmination of a year of her working on Terrain 360 related things, and it was really cool. Here's an example of what she mapped. There's the Captain Lewis named Tower Rock, which is kind of like the gateway. Oh, and I also could show here the label said this AI machine learning tool has recorded in this image, which I think is cool. But this is one of the examples that she mapped out. I think it looks fantastic. Cool. I get asked, how does this funded? It's usually a privately funded in partnership with the National Park Service. Lewis and Clark Trust in Lexington, Kentucky, helped finance a large section of the trail this year, the mapping of the trail. Ohio River right here, for example. And they identified undesignated tourism dollars in Kentucky, and the funds were used to map the Ohio. And then there was some additional funding from the Bureau of Land Management, small amounts in the Forest Service, I believe last year, and allowed us to create these amazing maps. The Ohio has its own beauty and allows you to travel down literally the length of the Ohio from West Virginia all the way to, I think we went to the confluence. I have to double check that. So it's super neat. And there's my boat operator, looking proud in Lexington, not Lexington, Louisville, actually, yeah, and having a good time there. I think this is one of the last segments of the project last summer. But yeah, part of this project too is bringing together towns along the Ohio River and along the trail, which is neat because they can incorporate this project within their website and write about it and get some press, and people are excited about, being able to showcase, oh, my town is on the map. Here's some cool historical landmarks that are close to our, where our town is. Here's an example, West Point, Kentucky, for example. They have a pretty big Lewis and Clark influence there. They stayed there, did a few things, and we were able to map some of the town out, and we're pretty excited about having us there. Part of the integration and dissemination is, here's an example of how we're integrated into websites. This is the advocacy website for Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. This is the website that they use, lewisandclark.travel. And as you can see, we've integrated the virtual experience within the actual website, and that is publicly accessible code. People can access and import any part of any trail within their website, just like they would with a YouTube video. You can see here, you can explore Slaughter River segment in your website. So it's not just limited to Terrain 360. Another example of a kind of a landing segment page that we provide clients, and you can integrate all the trails that we've mapped out into the website. We do have a client who's built an app using our API and have integrated the trails into an app, which I think is super neat. So that's it for the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. I have a few kind of small projects that are similarly related. Mapped out the Captain John Smith Trail with the Chesapeake Conservancy a couple years ago, mapped out a ton of waterways and rivers, which gave us the experience to be able to do some of these Western rivers for the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. Here's an example in Nanticoke. These are all tidal waterways, most of them. It's pretty flat, similar to the Ohio, for example. And then we got here all the rivers we mapped out back in 2016, 2017, 2018 in the Bay Area, starting with the headwaters of Susquehanna at Seagull Lake. Beautiful blue water there. And then of course, there's where is that? In Susquehanna by the Conowingo Dam. Map 4,000 miles, costs about $250,000 plus, and lots of press engagement. I get a lot of his visitors. Total, including the embedded maps, we get about 300,000 users per year visiting the digital maps, which I think is fantastic, and be able to explore these segments of the river, of the rivers of the bay, which I think are awesome. Continuing on, 1.2 million images captured, 3,000 miles of shoreline, 300 public access sites. We're pretty big at mapping out access. So for example, like a boat ramp, kayak put in, but that includes, on the Ohio, for example, we mapped out quite a few there, and just trying to capture those locations, because that could definitely be used on before and after a flood or some kind of event or whatever, or making an assessment if you're trying to assess a location, for funding, for example. You can kind of look at this is what it looked like in 2021. How can we improve this ramp? Some articles we did on Chesapeake Conservancy. Hey, one thing I do mention, 2020, what do we do? A lot of people ask me. I went to the one place in America where COVID, I don't think existed. It did, obviously. It just, they didn't think it did. Tangier Island. It's one of the, it's a very challenging place. It's the middle of the bay, and it's going to disappear within 50 years. And so I came up with the concept of, hey, let's map out Tangier Island, all the waterway, basically the shoreline, and let's map out the actual roads and streets, kind of create a digital record of this island. And then if we can go back in 10 years and showcase this is how it's changed here, with a very obvious digital, record of how it's changed from a ground level perspective. The people there are a little stubborn and just are not interested in leaving, and don't think climate change is happening, even though very much is happening. So I thought it'd be really important to capture this, especially a place that's pretty remote, early 2020. I thought it was probably one of the, I couldn't think of a better project to do, an island in the bay. And it ended up, here's some examples of, getting out there. It was crazy. Put a boat on a boat to get out there. Yeah, he brought his dog. So basically you can see an outline here on the right side. We basically mapped out the entirety of the island. Some sides we couldn't get, it was pretty windy, but we went in all these shoals and inlets. And then of course the streets. I mapped out the streets of the island. Pretty comprehensive. We probably could have done a little more, but here's an example of the streets. It's not super beautiful because it's cloudy, but you get the concept there. But I mean, it's I think it's only 18 inches above sea level total, the entire island, which is crazy. So how do you get involved? I know it's 3:40, it's getting late. One thing I always, we're always open to are small demo projects. And this is how the project with the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail started, a small demo. How can we, what can we do here? Here's what it would look like if we did map certain segments. That was what happened in 2021. Here's a trail I cannot wait to map. It's called the Lolo Trail. And we're actually going to map out segments that intersect the actual original Lolo Trail, similar to what that looks like. And but identify any trails or trail segments that have a high cultural, environmental, or historical value. And then identify potential funding partners, not always necessary. I think we're open to possible projects depending on the location and how big. As I said before, here's our class 5 experience on the Tuolumne River with my camera equipment. I was definitely very nervous about the equipment getting wrecked in those class 5 rapids, but we ended up with a beautiful virtual tour of that river, 19 miles of the Tuolumne, which I thought was super cool. And a lot of times, working with a local or a regional foundation, we have a pretty amazing project with the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and NOAA to map out Mallows Bay, which is the newest National Marine Sanctuary on the Potomac River. And there's a ton of shipwrecks there, as you can see here. And we've had historical pictures of the shipwrecks integrated into the virtual tour. You can see what they look like there. And here's what the boat looks like. You can read about the shipwreck. But it's more than just a virtual tour component. We're integrating historical information, building out a beautiful website platform for this to live. This is, I think, a great example of working with a nonprofit trail advocacy group to make it, and a federal partner all together. It's a great project. Lastly, questions. If anybody has any questions, you let me know. As I'm saying that, there's still people trying to get into the waiting room, which is really funny. But yeah, any questions? I'm gonna stop sharing. Cooper, do you want to follow up with anything? I know you're in here somewhere. Brian.
Yeah, I'm just wondered if you might talk really briefly on you mentioned some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes after you collect the data,
Right.
about adding and geotagging and things like that. But can you also just really briefly talk about what it takes to make those beautiful panoramic scenes and everything in terms of stitching all the images together and everything?
Yeah, that's fine. And that's a great point. I'll make a note to add that to my next presentation. So as you notice in some of the imagery, and I could probably share my screen again here, we have a camera array that takes five images. Let me share this again real quick. This right here, share. And these are triggered simultaneous. What it's doing is taking 5 pictures. We have the raw data that gets saved on the computer. So once we get back into the to our office, if you will, I basically, I don't know if you can see it, but I have it right behind me here is a giant image processing center. Basically, it basically matches the 5 images and creates points within the imagery to match and create, basically bake a panoramic image, right? So it creates one full, really wide image. Essentially, it's kind of a wraparound. And then it also, that same software, this is all local. This happens here. We matched when that picture was taken with the GPS time. So we know the camera and the GPS we have on board are synced together. So we know exactly when those are taken. And we basically match and say this set of images creates this panoramic image and is matched with this GPS lat long and elevation. And then we basically create an exported file that shows the matching. And then we send it to AWS to basically create how to describe it, like a web-based view, and it essentially breaks that or source 360-degree image into I think we're due like over 3,000 different tiles, 5 different layers deep. So if you have a slow internet connection, it may only load layer 1 or 2, so you'll at least see something. But if you look at the panoramic imagery on the website, you'll see it gets clearer and sharper as you look at it. It's kind of like a streaming video, if you will. But we use AWS to basically to create that digital view, essentially with that lat long, that GPS coordinate, and then we place it on the website. So our database is massive, a lot of imagery. Cooper, does that answer the question? That was a great question, by the way.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Cool. And then I don't mind taking any other questions. I know that we have the chat here. Feel free to ask any questions or not. We're available for that. Or a mute. I don't know. It's either or. I got one here. Derek Philippek. How much does everything cost? That's it is a tough question. Equipment or what we do, let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's a like a nonprofit that we work with. They have some funding. We charge per mile typically to do this, and that's everything. So the mileage rate is flat, and it can vary anywhere from like $150 per mile to $300, depending on how difficult the terrain is. But that includes everything from travel, on-site mapping to the digital processing, getting it on the website and getting everything loaded to the final. So it's everything. So it just depends. I mean, again, it depends on how much we're doing, how much mapping, and then of course how difficult the terrain is. You would think water is more difficult. If it rains, it is, but it's really those hard hiking trails that are probably the toughest thing with logistics and access and all that. So great question.
So if anyone else has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question or type it into the chat.
Can you said you developed an API. Can you talk more about that? And
Ken.
so kind of backstory. When I interviewed, I said my dream was to map national trails and wild and scenic rivers. And so like
We're doing it.
I don't know if you've like taken my dream from me or created an opportunity for me to realize it.
Here's my GitHub. This is the public API, and all it requires is API key, which we'll give you access to. And essentially all that does is it's just basically you call the API with, let's say you have the trail that we mapped, the Susquehanna River, and we'll basically give you the ID to that river. You plug it into the API call, and it just gives you all the lat longs and the scenes associated with that entire map. Same thing with an individual trail, for example. So there's a little bit of, front end, like we'll give you a key, and then, here's a list of maps that are assigned to you. But that's the API, and then allows you to integrate that into an app, for example, or an Esri product. We've had people at, I work with Virginia Commonwealth University on a few projects, and they integrate our maps with some of their projects that they're working on with the ecology department, for example, using the API. And then going back to your last question, I think you mentioned, did we steal your idea? I love that. No, I mean, there's always opportunities for, who knows, I don't think so. I take a less scientific approach, and, it's probably to my detriment. I am working on a project on the Altahama River in Georgia to map out the Altahama Scenic River with a PhD candidate from Clemson. And the whole purpose of that is more of a scientific inquiry, creating high resolution imagery, public access, tagging water features along the way. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement and for making this better. I had someone here say, "Oh, incoming internship and career opportunities." Yeah, definitely internships, no question. I know that with specific projects, especially, I know that the Lewis Clark National Historic Trail, they have interns are looking for, and my company possibly, maybe. No, I did not get added to the Google Street Views database. I started this whole thing as thinking I was the arch enemy of Google, but no, I don't. I think I've built my own platform, my own 360 platform. It could be integrated. We have the data. That's not an issue. It's more of like I invested so much time and effort making kind of our own platform, and it's getting a huge upgrade here in the spring too to make it just more user friendly. But somebody said also, are there special considerations for trails? And I want to back up real quick with the Google Street View thing. We can integrate to that. If you become a client, we go map out a certain trail segment, and you'd like it integrated to Google Street View. That's not a problem at all. It can be done. And then there's special considerations for trails, wild, scenic rivers, wilderness. Would you not work in wilderness? Yeah, 100% will work in wilderness. Yeah, that's the best part of the job. It's working in the middle of nowhere. Becky, appreciate that. If you have something that you want to work on, I'll go in the middle of nowhere. We have a potential project this summer that we're going to be in the middle of nowhere, and that's the best thing. So yeah, I'll go anywhere, literally. So Cooper knows, right, Ryan Cooper? We mapped out some pretty remote places this past year. So
I think she's talking about like specifically designated wilderness areas that might have like certain restrictions on vehicles and modes of travel. things like
Good
that.
point. I know there's areas where we can't use an outboard, for example. We'll just float it. Or if there's a place where we can't have an AT, like let's say the Pacific Crest Trail or Continental Divide Trail, so some segments through a national park, for example, you can't use an ATV. We'll just hike it with a single camera and a tripod. So yeah, I think we're flexible to try to figure out the best way of doing a project. So yeah, thanks for clarifying, Cooper. Appreciate that. But yeah, I think there's no limit. I think it's just just more. I will say, Becky, just to clear, we did map out the Appalachian Trail. ATVs are not allowed on there, and of course we have to carry gear for 20 miles in between shuttle points, and so we just had a single camera and a tripod, and it's still beautiful imagery that's created from that with a GPS. So hope that answers that question.
And were you using Huggin for your stitching?
No, we use a software called AutoPanel for the stitching portion, but that's the only paid software that we use for the actual stitching. Everything else is all custom-made software. Everything from the capture software, which is basically a Windows program that we wrote. So we have a Windows PC on the boat. It's in like a waterproof case with a huge battery, and that's custom software that connects to the cameras. And then, the only part we have a third-party software is with the actual stitching portion. Once it's stitched, it still needs to be broken up into multiple tiles, if you will, for it to be able to work on the web. And that's another custom software as well. There's a lot of third-party softwares out there to do this. I just still think do it as well. So I was like, I'm going to opt. I need a pipeline that can handle thousands and thousands and thousands of images, because we'll go out, we'll come back, and we'll have 100,000 pictures. I don't want to do that manually. So I need an automated way to make this happen. So that's why I had to opt for all custom written software. Anybody else?
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan, again for presenting today. We really appreciate it. And thank you again for everybody joining the National Trail System GIS Network. Thanks for being patient with our technical difficulties, and we'll get everything rolling along like normal next time. Real fast, just to make sure everybody's aware of the news with the National Trail System, that 2 new National Historic Trails have been designated. And so there are now 21 National Historic Trails. So Chilkoot National Historic Trail and the Butterfield Overland National Historic Trail. So I'd encourage everybody to take a look at those and find out information that you can. I have a link for the special resource study that was done for the Butterfield Overland Trail, so you can take a look at that if you're interested. Other than that, unless Ryan or Peter Bonzel have any other input, we'll let everybody go.
Brian, real quick, Ryan and Pete, thank you for this opportunity. And just, I'm open to any project type, even doing small demos. I love this. This is my passion. I have another job where I do web development, but this is what I love the most. So, if you want to have an idea or concept, let's just talk, no pressure, and we'll see what happens. I've worked with Cooper on some demo stuff before, and maybe a few others here, and I'd be excited to do anything. So let me know. Sorry, Peter, didn't mean to interrupt there, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. This is really, really amazing work. Peter or Ryan?
Just wanted to remind everybody that the network has switched to a quarterly schedule. So I know it's the new year and things have changed and everything. We're switching systems from WebEx to Microsoft Teams. And also just wanted to remind everybody our next call is scheduled for April 18th. And if anybody has any topic ideas or wants to present on anything, please reach out to either me, Brian, or Peter, and we would be happy to get that scheduled.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks. I'm gonna end it. Thank you.